An 8-year-old homeless girl looked at a wealthy man who had lost his faith in miracles and said, "If I can make your son speak, will you give me your leftovers?" He chuckled. But what his 9-year-old non-verbal son said next left everyone frozen. Before we begin, let's create a wave of faith. Comment Amen if you believe God still brings lost families back together. Snow fell in relentless sheets over Seabrook, a small harbor town clinging to the rugged coast of Maine like a barnacle to a ship's hull. The December wind knifed off the Atlantic, driving flurries into narrow streets where old clapboard buildings leaned toward one another, as if to share their warmth. The harbor's lights flickered through the snowfall, blurred halos in the dark, while the lighthouse blinked a steady white pulse across the water. The air was salt and ice, sharp enough to sting the lungs. On the edge of the pier, where lobster traps were stacked high like sleeping giants, a small figure emerged from between two shuttered bait shops. She moved with a mixture of caution and defiance, as if every step was a decision between retreat and advance. Anna Lee was 8 years old, though years of cold nights and skipped meals had carved a seriousness into her small frame. She was thin, the sort of thin that wasn't just bone, but the absence of safety. Her shoulders narrow under a frayed gray coat 2 sizes too big. Her hair was a stubborn chestnut brown, tangled into a braid that she rebraided each morning with impatient fingers. Her face was pale under the sodium glow of the street lamps, a delicate oval with dark eyes that measured everything before allowing it close. Survival had made her wary and resourceful. She noticed loose nails in dock planks, counted coins by weight, and could tell from a man's walk whether he carried kindness or trouble. She did not beg unless she saw a real chance. Tonight, the chance stepped out of the warm, gold-lit entrance of the Grey Gull, the most expensive restaurant in town. Jonathan Hayes was a man who looked as though life had shaped him from the same granite that rimmed the Maine coast. At 42, he carried himself with the self-assurance of someone who could read both a financial report and a storm chart without missing a beat. Tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair was touched lightly at the temples with gray, cut neat and practical. His eyes were the deep, cold blue of the Atlantic in winter, set in a face line not with age, but with years of decision-making under pressure. He wore a charcoal overcoat tailored to his frame, a navy scarf wound once around his neck, and polished leather gloves that looked like they'd never known frostbite. Jonathan was the CEO of Hayes Maritime Logistics, a shipping empire inherited from his father, but expanded under his own shrewd hand. Since his wife's death 3 years ago, he had grown quieter, more guarded, directing his energy into his business and his son. His manner with strangers was polite but brisk, the efficiency of a man who had more appointments than daylight. Beside him, holding on to the crook of his arm, was his 9-year-old son, Eli Hayes. Slight and wiry, with hair the color of wet sand and a complexion that freckled in the summer, Eli's most striking feature was his eyes, a pale gray that seemed almost silver under certain light, wide, and always watchful. He had never spoken a word in his life. Diagnosed with a severe form of childhood apraxia, he communicated through gestures, drawings, and a rich, expressive gaze. He had the quiet intensity of someone who lived half in the world and half in a place only he could reach. Bundled in a navy peacoat and boots that squeaked against the icy pier, he kept close to his father, head tilted slightly as though listening to something only he could hear. Anna's stomach twisted at the sight of them, but it wasn't just hunger. Something about the boy, his face, his eyes, pulled at her like the tide. She stepped forward, her boots crunching softly on the snow, until she stood a few feet from them. Her voice came out small but steady. "Sir," she said, looking up at Jonathan, "if I can make your son speak, will you give me your leftovers?" Jonathan paused, blinking down at her. A small huff of amusement escaped him, a laugh without warmth. "That's a new one," he said, his tone dry. He began to shake his head, but before he could answer, Eli turned toward Anna. His lips parted. "She was with me before," he said. The words were clear, unhurried, and carrying the weight of something remembered. Jonathan froze. His grip tightened on his son's shoulder as if to steady himself against a shifting deck. For a moment, the only sound was the wind and the distant clang of a buoy bell. He stared at Eli, then at Anna, confusion and disbelief warring in his expression. Before Jonathan could speak again, movement stirred at the edge of the lamplight. From the shadow of a weathered fish shack, a large dog padded forward. He was a German shepherd, but age and hardship had marked him. His coat, once rich sable and black, was dusted with gray at the muzzle. A white cloth, tied neatly, covered both eyes. Blindness had claimed his sight long ago. His ears, though, stood alert, and his step was sure, guided by scent and memory. This was Captain, 9 years old, with a calm authority that came from years of guarding and guiding. He carried himself like an old soldier, scars hidden beneath fur, head held high despite the darkness in his eyes. Around Seabrook, Captain was known as Sam Rivers' dog, a creature of habit often seen at the docks or curled on the deck of Sam's boat. Captain stopped in front of Anna and lowered his head, sniffing her with slow, deliberate breaths. Then, in a gesture that seemed almost ceremonial, he pressed his muzzle gently to her knee and stayed there. From farther down the pier, a man leaned against a piling, watching. Sam Rivers was 70 if he was a day, tall and still broad in the chest from decades of hauling nets and steering through nor'easters. His hair, white as the surf, was kept in a thick wave beneath a wool cap, and his beard was neatly trimmed, though the lines on his face told stories the sea had written there. His eyes, a weathered blue, missed little. Sam had been a fisherman, then a harbor pilot, and now a semi-retired boatman who knew every tide, current, and rumor in Seabrook. He was slow to trust but fiercely loyal once given reason, and he carried an old grief like a stone in his pocket. His own niece had vanished 8 years ago, taken in the night from her home. That loss had sharpened his protectiveness toward the vulnerable and made him a quiet guardian to those the world forgot. As Captain remained beside Anna, Sam's gaze sharpened. Even through the snow, the child's face struck him, those eyes, that chin, like a memory pulled from deep water. He straightened slowly, realization dawning like the lighthouse beams sweeping across the pier. Anna Lee looked almost exactly like his niece had at the age she disappeared. Jonathan, still holding Eli's shoulder, finally found his voice. "What did you just say?" he asked his son, but Eli didn't look at him. His attention stayed fixed on Anna, as if the rest of the world had gone quiet. "She was with me. Before," Eli repeated softly. The snow swirled thicker, muffling the sounds of the harbor. Jonathan glanced from the strange girl to his son, and something unsteady entered his expression. A man used to certainty faced with the impossible. Captain shifted closer to Anna, his head angling toward her protectively, while Sam Rivers took a slow step forward from the shadows, his boots crunching in the snow. High above, the lighthouse swept another beam across the water, and the bell buoy tolled once in the dark. In that moment, none of them knew that this meeting, on a snowy pier in Seabrook, would pull open an 8-year-old wound, uncover buried truths, and draw all of them into a storm far more dangerous than the one falling from the sky. The drive from the harbor to Jonathan Hayes' estate wound through snow-choked streets where the storm had laid its claim on every shingle and shutter. Street lamps swayed in the wind, their cones of light bending and scattering like shaken snow globes. Inside the warm confines of the black SUV, Anna sat in the back seat beside Eli. She kept her hands tucked under her thighs, as if to keep them from straying toward the untouched box of pastries Jonathan had tossed onto the seat between them. She could feel Eli watching her, not with suspicion, but with that same fixed attention he'd had on the pier, the sort that made her feel as though she'd walked into someone else's half-remembered dream. Jonathan drove in silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Wealth had given him a taste for control, but tonight's events, the girl's sudden appearance, his son's impossible words, were a riptide under his steady hand. And now, as he glanced at her in the rearview mirror, another current pulled at him. Familiarity. It had been faint in the cold shadows of the pier, but here, in the amber glow of the SUV's interior, it was unmistakable. The slope of her cheekbone matched Eli's, the shape of her chin tilted upward in that same small defiance when she was spoken to, and her eyes, deep brown, but with a small, pale fleck near the iris, mirrored the exact genetic quirk that Eli carried in his own. Even the way she sat, ankles crossed, shoulders slightly forward, was a pose he had seen countless times in his son. Jonathan told himself not to jump to conclusions, but the likeness was so precise it left him unsettled. The estate appeared out of the snowfall, like a ship's prow, lights glowing against the gloom. The house was an old federal-style mansion perched on the cliff's edge, its white columns and black shutters made ghostly by the storm. A tall wrought-iron gate swung inward as they approached, manned by a uniformed guard who gave a respectful nod. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and wood smoke. The foyer's marble floor reflected the chandelier's light, and a grand staircase rose in a graceful curve toward the second floor. Anna's boots squeaked against the polished surface, and she resisted the urge to pull her coat tighter around her thin frame. She felt out of place in the opulence, but Eli stayed beside her, his small hand brushing hers as if anchoring them both. Jonathan led them into a paneled study where a fire crackled in a stone hearth. He motioned for Anna to sit, then pulled out his phone. His voice, when he spoke, was measured. "Doctor Holloway? It's Jonathan Hayes. I need a rush DNA test, my son and a young girl. Tonight." He listened, nodded, and gave their address. Anna looked between father and son, curiosity battling with caution. "Why do you want my blood?" she asked finally. Jonathan's gaze was direct, almost too direct. "Because I need to know why my son spoke for the first time in his life when he saw you." His eyes lingered on her face again, and he knew it wasn't just the moment on the pier that had shaken him. The resemblance was too strong to ignore. Eli's voice cut through the room again, soft but clear. "I talk better when she's here." Jonathan's head whipped toward him. "Eli, you're talking." His words trailed off as if afraid to scare the moment away. Eli nodded once and looked at Anna with a small, private smile. "It feels like my mouth remembers." Hours later, after the test samples were taken by a visiting nurse, a brisk woman named Marlene with neat hair and the calm efficiency of someone used to late-night calls, Jonathan sat alone in the study, reviewing Eli's medical file. He'd read it dozens of times before, but tonight something caught him. A page that should have listed neonatal complications was missing. Another page bore faint impressions, as though something had been erased. A notation in faded ink read, "Attending physician, Dr. Milton Gray." The name was a ghost. Jonathan had never heard it before. The storm had quieted to a whisper when the doorbell rang. Jonathan found Sam Rivers standing on the porch, snow dusting his cap and beard. The old mariner stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, captain at his side. The dog's ears twitched, nose lifted toward the familiar scent of Anna, somewhere deeper in the house. "I saw you at the pier," Sam said, shaking off the cold. His voice was gravel wrapped in cloth. "That girl, Anna, there's something you need to know." Jonathan studied him warily. "And you are?" "Sam Rivers. I've been in Seabrook my whole life. Captain here." He reached down to pat the German shepherd's head. "Wasn't always mine. He used to belong to a family, 8, maybe 9 years back, that had 2 newborns, a boy and a girl. I saw them myself, the night they brought the babies home from the hospital. Then, one winter night, a man with silver hair came to their house, took the girl. Captain tried to stop him, got a knife across the face for his trouble, lost his sight that night. The man left the boy and vanished with the girl." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Silver hair?" Sam nodded slowly. "I never saw him again, but Captain, he's been searching ever since. Leads me to places, abandoned warehouses, old docks, always like he's following a scent he half remembers. You ask me, that dog remembers more about that night than anyone else alive." In the corner of the room, Captain lifted his head, ears swiveling toward the sound of soft footsteps. Anna appeared in the doorway, wearing one of Eli's oversized sweaters. Captain moved to her immediately, pressing his head into her hands. She knelt, fingers threading through his fur, and for a long moment neither moved. Sam's eyes narrowed as he watched. "He knows her?" he said quietly. "Not just from tonight. From before." Jonathan glanced at the file still open on his desk, at the erased lines and missing pages. Dr. Milton Gray. A name that would not let him go. He looked from Sam to Anna to Eli, his silent son now speaking in low, steady words to the girl who'd walked out of the snow, and felt a shift, subtle but undeniable, like the keel of a ship turning toward deeper water. Outside, the last of the storm slipped away over the Atlantic, leaving the town swaddled in a brittle calm. Inside, under the watch of a blind dog who had not forgotten, the first pieces of a buried truth began to surface. The winter sun in Seabrook rose reluctantly, smearing pale light across the icy Atlantic. The snowstorm had passed, leaving the streets muffled and the harbor locked in brittle calm. Inside the Hayes estate, the atmosphere was anything but still. Jonathan stood in his study, a manila envelope spread open before him, the edges trembling in his hands. Across the polished desk lay the DNA report, its conclusion printed in the unemotional precision of science. Probability of full sibling relationship, 99.98%. Anna Lee and Eli Hayes were not just connected, they were twins. Jonathan's chest felt tight. He looked at the two children sitting cross-legged on the carpet in front of the fire, Captain resting between them like a living wall. Anna was showing Eli how to braid a strip of cloth, her hands quick and sure. Eli, normally hesitant with fine motor skills, followed her movements without falter, as if the memory was stored somewhere deep and long before language. Jonathan saw it again, the mirror of their gestures, the identical tilt of their heads. And now, the truth was undeniable. He didn't have the luxury of shock. The name Dr. Milton Gray glared up from Eli's altered medical records like a challenge. A call to his corporate security team had yielded little. Gray had resigned from the regional hospital 8 years ago, a week after Eli's birth, and then disappeared. But the financial trail told another story. A dormant bank account under Gray's name had received a transfer the same month. 7 figures, untraceable in origin. After that, nothing. No address, no tax filings. Gray had vanished into the fog. Jonathan knew that money left footprints even when people didn't. He made a note to pull his company's international contacts. If Gray was hiding overseas, someone in his network could find him. In the meantime, there was Captain. The blind shepherd had been restless all morning, pacing between the door and Anna, his nails clicking on the hardwood. Sam Rivers noticed first. "He's got something in his head," the old mariner said, pulling on his thick wool coat. "When he gets like this, it's best to follow." They bundled up, Anna in a too large parka Jonathan had dug from storage, Eli in his navy pea coat, Sam in his weather-beaten boots. Captain led them down the icy driveway and through the quiet streets, nose low to the ground, every step sure despite his lack of sight. They left the neat rows of townhouses behind, the snow thinning over cracked asphalt as they neared the town's edge. The destination was a house, or what had once been one. It squatted at the edge of a frozen marsh, its clapboard siding warped and bleached gray, roof sagging under years of neglect. Windows gaped like missing teeth. The front steps bowed and rotting. Sam's expression hardened. "I've been here before," he said. "This place has been empty since before the twins were born." Captain didn't hesitate. He went straight through the sagging doorway into the gloom. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old salt. In the corner of what might once have been a nursery, beneath a collapsed shelf, lay a small bundle wrapped in discolored cloth. Anna knelt and lifted it, shaking free a powder of dust. Inside was a baby's towel, soft once, now worn thin, with faded embroidery at one corner. E.H. The thread was frayed, but the initials were clear. Beneath it was something heavier, a small rusted key, its bow ornate with an old-fashioned design. Sam took it, turning it over in his calloused hands. "This ain't for a house," he said. "It's for a cargo lock. I've seen these before, used for warehouse storage back when your father ran Hayes Maritime, Jonathan." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. If the key opened one of the company's old warehouses, then whatever had happened to Anna might have been tied to his family's business without his knowledge, and that meant someone close to the company had been involved. Back at the estate, Jonathan locked the towel and key in his desk. He didn't notice the red light blinking on his private email terminal until he sat down. The sender's address was a jumble of letters, untraceable at a glance. The subject line was blank. The message itself was short, typed in bold. "Full moon is coming. They'll return for what belongs to them." Jonathan's jaw tightened. He looked out the window toward the dark line of the horizon, his mind already racing through scenarios. Behind him, Anna's laughter rang in the hall, light, brief, and achingly familiar. He knew now that time was not on their side. The full moon hung low over Seabrook Harbor, casting the water in molten silver, streaked with red, where the winter haze caught its light, a strange hue that locals called the blood moon. The air was sharp enough to sting the lungs, and the wooden planks of the old pier creaked under the bite of frost. Jonathan Hayes stood near the edge of the waterfront, his coat collar turned up against the wind, his eyes scanning every shadow. He'd brought Anna and Eli for what he thought would be a quick trip to check one of the warehouses the rusted key might open. He didn't like being out this late, but the cryptic email left him no choice. He had to see for himself what danger was circling them. The children stayed close together, Captain at their side. The blind shepherd's white scarf fluttered in the breeze, his ears turning toward the smallest of sounds, the rattle of chains against a metal bollard, the faint crunch of footsteps on grit far down the dock. Beside them, Sam Rivers kept his battered fisherman's cap pulled low, his frame tense, his eyes constantly shifting like a man expecting trouble. Jonathan's instincts were right. The attack came without warning, two figures emerging from behind stacked cargo crates, another stepping from the shadows of a moored trawler. The first man, broad-shouldered and wearing a dark watch cap, lunged for Anna. She twisted away, but his gloved hand caught her coat. Eli shouted, the sound raw and panicked, a stark contrast to his earlier soft-spoken words. Then came the voice from the darkness, smooth, familiar, cold. Jonathan, still chasing ghosts? Lucas Ward stepped into the moonlight, his face drawn into a sharp smile. Tall and lean, with silver-shot hair swept back and an expensive wool coat buttoned to the throat. Lucas looked every inch the businessman he once was. Years ago, he and Jonathan had built Hayes Maritime into the largest shipping firm in the region until Lucas's hunger for risk and secrecy poisoned the partnership. Jonathan had bought him out, quietly for the sake of the company, but rumors swirled about Lucas's dealings overseas, particularly in experimental neuroscience. Jonathan's voice was flat. You did this. You took her from me. Lucas's smirk deepened. I didn't take her from you, Jonathan. I took her from a fate you never would have understood. The twins, together, they're more than the sum of their parts. Their brains light up like nothing we've ever seen when they're near each other. I intend to finish what Dr. Gray started. From the shadows, Dr. Milton Gray appeared, smaller than Jonathan expected. Gray's frame was wiry, his movements twitchy. His eyes, dark, restless, flicked between Jonathan and the children, as though measuring the distance to escape. He wore a worn brown coat with a frayed collar, and despite the cold, sweat beaded his forehead. Bring them, Lucas ordered. The men moved to grab the twins, steering them toward a fishing vessel idling at the far end of the dock. But Captain moved first. With a sudden growl that rolled low and deep, he surged forward, pulling against Sam's grip. Despite his blindness, he navigated the narrow pier by scent and memory, darting between the attackers, his body slamming into the man holding Anna. The force knocked the man sideways, sending him sprawling against the railing. Anna bolted, Captain circling back to block the path of another assailant. Sam saw the opening. This way, he barked, pushing Eli ahead of him toward a thin alley of planks between two sheds. Captain led them, his nose to the wind, each footfall confident on the warped boards. They weaved through gaps barely wide enough for a man, the sound of boots pounding behind them. Jonathan had Lucas pinned in his gaze. You're not taking them. Lucas's smile didn't falter. You can't stop what's coming. The blood moon marks the cycle. Tonight was never about you. It's about the data, and them. He gestured toward the fleeing children. Jonathan lunged, but two of Lucas's men intercepted him, shoving him back against a mooring post. On the other side of the pier, Captain led Sam, Anna, and Eli onto the old wooden bridge that arched over the frozen inlet. Their breath came in clouds, their footsteps loud on the boards. Behind them, one of the kidnappers gave chase, his hand closing on Eli's sleeve, just as Captain turned and hurled himself at the man's legs. The attacker went down hard, the crack of his skull against the boards echoing over the water. Flashing blue and red lights tore through the darkness, sirens wailing as Seabrook police cruisers skidded to a halt at the edge of the harbor. Officers spilled out, weapons drawn. Lucas froze, his expression tightening for the first time. Dr. Gray raised his hands, his face pale, but an officer wrenched them behind his back in cuffs. Sam emerged from the bridge with the children, Captain trotting beside them, his chest heaving. Jonathan's eyes locked on Lucas as the police led him away. "It's over," he said, but Lucas only smiled thinly, glancing toward the moon. "No, Jonathan, this was just the retrieval attempt. The real storm hasn't arrived." The words followed Jonathan into the quiet that came after, the creak of the dock, the whisper of the tide. Somewhere out there in the dark, something still waited. The first light of day crept over the Atlantic, turning the frost on Seabrook's rooftops into 1,000 tiny mirrors. The air was calm now, the chaos of the blood moon night having retreated into memory, though its echo lingered in Jonathan Hayes's mind. Standing in the great hall of his estate, he watched Anna and Eli chase each other around the carved banister, their laughter spilling into every corner like sunlight. The legal process had moved faster than Jonathan dared hope. The DNA evidence was irrefutable, and the courts moved swiftly to restore Anna's birthright. She was now Anna Hayes, twin sister to Eli, her name inked into the family records where it had always belonged. The adoption papers were signed in a quiet courtroom. The judge, an elderly woman named Margaret Heller, with soft gray eyes and a fondness for children, smiling warmly as she placed her pen down. Jonathan had rarely felt so certain about anything in his life. For Eli, the change was visible and immediate. His speech, once a struggle of hesitant syllables, now flowed as naturally as the tide. At breakfast, he rattled off a list of ideas for games he wanted to play with Anna, stories he wanted to write together, even plans for building a fort in the garden when the snow melted. Jonathan listened, marveling at the voice he had feared he might never hear this way. It was as if the missing piece of his son's soul had been found, and its return made the boy whole. Captain, too, had found a home. Jonathan had decided the blind shepherd would stay with them permanently. The dog's loyalty was unquestionable, and his presence had become a comfort to everyone in the house. Sam Rivers moved into the estate as well, accepting Jonathan's offer to serve as caretaker of the property. Though Sam laughed off the title of manager, the children quickly began calling him Grandpa Sam. His weathered hands, once tied to the rigging of ships, now tended the small household with quiet pride. Jonathan had one more gesture to make. In the sunroom overlooking the sea, he had a space built for Captain, a warm, spacious nook lined with soft blankets and a low shelf filled with chew toys. Above the space, mounted on the wall, hung the white scarf Captain had worn the night they met, cleaned and pressed, framed behind glass. It was more than a keepsake. It was a reminder that courage could come from the most unlikely of places. Life settled into a rhythm. The estate's old rooms, once echoing with silence, were now alive with the sound of footsteps and the low hum of conversation. Sam often cooked hearty stews in the kitchen, the air rich with the scent of thyme and slow-cooked beef. Anna and Eli could be found sprawled on the floor in front of the fire, sketching the ships they imagined sailing. Captain would curl up beside them, ears twitching at their voices, as if painting his own picture in the dark canvas of his mind. And then came the day Jonathan unveiled his surprise, a new ship, gleaming in the winter sunlight at the dock. She was smaller than the cargo vessels he once managed, but crafted with care, a white hull trimmed in deep navy, her deck polished to a golden sheen. The name Morning Star curved in gold letters across her stern. "This," Jonathan told them, "is for us. No business, no deals, just family." They set out at dawn 2 days later. Sam took the helm with the ease of a man born to the sea, the children darting from bow to stern in boundless excitement. Captain lay near the wheelhouse, the wind lifting his fur, nose tilted toward the horizon as if he could feel the sunlight long before it reached them. At the bow, Anna and Eli stood side by side, hands clasped. The wind teased their hair into a wild tangle, the ocean spray cool on their faces. Anna turned to her brother, her voice steady and certain. "We're never going to be apart again." Eli squeezed her hand. "Never?" Behind them, Jonathan watched, a quiet warmth in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt the weight lift from his shoulders. They had survived the storm, both the one that raged outside and the one that had threatened to tear them apart from within. The morning star cut through the gentle swells, the rising sun spilling gold across the deck. In that moment, with family gathered close and the horizon wide open before them, Jonathan knew he would protect this life, these children, and this bond at any cost. The world might have taken them once, but it would not happen again. Sometimes God works in ways we cannot see, weaving threads of love and hope through storms we never expected. Anna and Eli's reunion was not just a coincidence. It was a reminder that even when the world tries to separate what he has joined, his plan will always find a way. In our daily lives, we may face loss, fear, or the feeling that we are alone, but miracles still happen when we hold on to faith and love. If this story touched your heart, share it so others can feel the same hope. Leave a comment below, tell us what you believe God's message is for you today, and subscribe to join a community that believes in miracles. And if you believe that God can reunite hearts, protect families, and guide the lost home, comment Amen. May the Lord bless you and keep you always.